Everybody has a unique story. It's shaped by the unique circumstances of life. Successes and failures, hopes and fears, joy and pain. And everybody's story is part of a bigger story. A story that runs from Genesis to Revelation. A story that starts in a garden and ends in a city. A story that begins in beauty, is marred by brokenness, but ultimately is restored. It's the story of the gospel. It's the story of Jesus.
We've been talking for the last couple. Whoa, there we go. We've been talking for the last couple of weeks about this my story, our story, his story concept. And again, for most of us, we tend to get it backwards. We tend to think that God is a part of our story. Now, we might never say that out loud, but that's really the way that we live our lives, because we have a work life where we do all this stuff and we get things done, and then we have this home life and we have these activities that we like to do, and then we carve out this little space of our life that maybe we go to church or we connect with other people, but the idea that our story is part of his ongoing story, that there should be no part of our story that is separated from his story, is something that many times we just don't live out regularly. And so we've been looking over the last couple of weeks at some of our individual stories. We talked a couple of weeks ago about John and John's story and how God took someone who was running, actively running and struggling with faith, and is God real, and the anger and all that came from that, and how God throughout that entire time in John's story had been bringing him back, had been reaching out for him. I still love how when we talked about his story that he flipped a coin. I could end up in Nashville, I could end up back up here. And God brought him to a place where he could be impacted with the good news of Jesus. And now, as we see him and the others lead on Sunday morning, what an incredible testimony to the fact that John's story is a part of our story, and our story is a part of his story. In fact, as I was watching the team this morning, I was loving it. Jason, by the way, love what you do up here. I'm a keys guy, I'm a piano guy, so when we don't have that, I just tell you, I'm a little bitter. I don't say it every Sunday, all right? But I'm a little bitter when we don't have somebody over there. And it just adds so much. It's so fun watching them lead. And as I looked at the team leading this morning, okay, we had John, who shared his story a couple weeks ago. We had Krista, who shared her story last week. Someone who had been, again, running for what God had desired and isolating herself rather than connecting with others, and what God did to bring that about and is continuing to do in their lives. And one of the reasons that we share those stories is not to put those folks on a pedestal and say that they figured it all out. Because if you were listening carefully to their stories, there's still things that they're struggling with each and every day. They're not yet where God wants them to be. That is part of the story. That's their story that becomes part of our story, and part of our story is how we walk through life with them as they take next steps in their journey of faith. And our story as a church is part of God's story, his story that he is telling here on earth. And so today we're going to take a very detailed look at what our story is, what our story should be. So I'm going to give you just a couple quick little tidbits about that, and then we're going to go in specifically to what that means. It was interesting, this last Thursday, I was working up at the University of Illinois Chicago on the baseball field. Best part about that is that it's turf, so my shoes don't get dirty. I don't have to clean them afterwards. That's just how lazy I am. And so I'm up there on turf, and one of the things that we don't do during the course of a regular game is talk much with the coaches. They call that fraternization, and we get marked off for that if we do that. We respond to questions and do things, but this was a fall ball game. which meant that the team was split into two sides, and they were playing against each other and running through some stuff and all. And the first base coach, he and I began talking. I asked him how long he'd been coaching there. He said it was his second day, so pretty new guy. And he said he was from California, so I assumed that he had played baseball out in California. It turned out, no, he played in one of the suburbs at a school that I regularly umpire for. We were talking back and forth, and he made a couple comments, and it doesn't often come up when I'm on the baseball field, but kind of doors opened, and I said, yeah, he found out kind of what I do, the fact that I'm a pastor, that's my regular job, if you want to call it that, and he goes, oh really, what kind of church? I said, well, we're a church plant, we started a few years ago. He goes, oh man, our church, we just had our very first Sunday, this last Sunday, and it's actually another IBSA church that we're connected with, called Church of the Beloved. They opened up a brand new campus in Wicker Park last Sunday. And here, this first base coach was a part of a church plant that's connected to the same church planting organization that we were a part of. It was just this cool connection that happened on the middle of the baseball field, and I had zero idea that something like that was going to happen. It was just so cool hearing about the excitement and the energy that came from what God was doing in the midst of their church. And at our church, part of our story is the fact that within this area, there were so many incredible churches. I mean, great churches, awesome people that love Jesus and were doing great things. But over the course of several years, through some other churches doing mission trips to this area and different things, began to realize that there was a group of people who were not finding connection at one of those great churches. We kind of began to identify that group of people as belonging to one of two groups, two subgroups. Either they were people that had just never really been to church. So those churches that were around and had a culture that was kind of a church culture they just didn't feel like they fit in at or didn't understand. And there was another subgroup that was people that used to go to church and didn't go anymore. We heard about those kinds of folks the last 2 weeks as we were sharing some of our individual stories that were here. We said, well, man, there needs to be a church like that in that area. It's such a large space. We need something like that. And so over 6 years ago, my wife and my kids and I, along with some other folks, we came together and began to start what would eventually become Journey Church. We started meeting in a small group. It started in Mantino, in my grandmother's house, is where everything kind of kicked off and began to grow from there. And we saw our small groups multiply. We saw people coming to Christ. We began to worship just once a month. First, we didn't really have enough folks to gather together every week. So once a month, we get together, and then we go back to our small groups the next 3 weeks. And then we come together again and worship. And eventually, we began worshiping ongoing. And we were portable for a long time. For those of you that worked with us during that time, we started out in one place, went to another school, went from that school to another school. During the meantime, whenever they'd be, stripping floors or doing things in the gyms where we were meeting, we'd meet at parks or we meet at other buildings. I mean, it was all kinds of crazy. And for those of you that remember what it was like to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go grab a trailer and in the middle of the snow, sometimes dig it out of the snow and hook it up to trucks and drive it where we're going and unload. I mean, it was chaos, but it was great chaos. And it was exhausting, but it was a good kind of tired. And it was so fun to watch what God was doing in our midst. And about a year and a half ago or so, we had the opportunity to come to this place. And it's a building that when we walked in was in really bad disrepair. And so many things that had to be done to it. And our people gathered together and said, we're going to make a financial commitment to purchase and improve and do all of those kinds of things. And so we began to get in and do that. And that's something that I couldn't do a lot of help with because I have some gifting in some areas, but being handy in any way, shape, or form is not my gift. And so we had to rely on a lot of other folks that could do those kinds of things. And so we began to step in to a new space. And as we stepped into a new space, there were new people to reach and new folks to connect with, and it was so great to see what God was doing in our midst. And so we began to ask the question, what does Journey mean to people? What does Journey mean to people that have been a part of our church for 6+ years? What does Journey mean to people that have been part of our church for 6+ months? And all of that in between. And so we got a short little video to show you just what some people's answers happen to be.
I got a question for you. What does Journey mean to you?
Actually, for a long time, I wasn't really sure what it meant to me, but recently I realized that Journey means home.
Journey is my family away from my real family.
Oh, pretty much everything.
Family and where we're going to go next. Everybody helping you and you to get where they need to be in their walk with God and in life.
It means a lot because I've been through a lot, and learning about God actually helps me come to the plan of God and make me happy.
Family communication.
Journey is my church family that encourages me every week to love God more, to love others.
Oh my gosh, Journey is family. There's no better way to put it.
Knowing more about Christ.
Family.
It just means a lot.
Family.
Amber, what does Journey mean to you?
Well, Journey, it's all about from point A into point B. Doesn't matter how you get to it.
There's one word that kept coming up during that. That was family. And so I'm not sure what weird cousin Michael was there at the end, but we've all seen one of those, right? We've all been a part of that at different times. We've all experienced what that means. Now, when it comes to our story, what does it mean to be a church? Family is a key word, but family is a word that for many of us carries different connotations. Some of us have very good feelings about the word family. For some of us, family means safety and security and connection and joy and happiness and all of those things. And for others of us, family is a more difficult word. It's brokenness and conflict and strife and insecurity and all of those things that come with that. So I want us to go to the book of Ephesians, if we could today, Ephesians chapter 4, and I want us to talk a little bit about what that looks like and how God intended for us to live as a local body of believers. Not just Big C Church, all of God's followers, but our local church in this place. Paul is talking to the church at Ephesus, a specific local body. He says, "Therefore I, the prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk worthy of the calling you have received, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, accepting one another in love, diligently keeping the unity of the Spirit with the peace that binds us. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope at your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all." Now it says there in that second verse going into verse 3, it talks about with patience, accepting one another in love, diligently keeping the unity of the Spirit. Because here's what I know. I know every family has moments of disunity. Every family. I mean, it could be the family that when they go out to eat at supper time, they look like Leave It to Beaver, right? They look like the Cleavers. They look like the perfect family. They look like everything's okay and good and wonderful, and they go home and dad's snipping at the daughter, and mom's frustrated with dad, and all these different things are going on. Why? Because families, relationships, and we have said for years here at Journey that relationships get messy. I mean, they just do. People that love each other the most, many times, are the ones who are most hurtful to one another. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, we know each other well enough to know what our buttons are, right? You don't know somebody very well, it's hard to know what to do to tick them off. But when you know somebody really well, sometimes all it takes is a look, or a question, or a comment, or whatever it might be, and you know exactly what to do to just push the button and set them off. That's one of the reasons why those of us that are in relationship with one another have the ability to cause that kind of strife and disunity so easily. Another reason for it, though, is that when you are in relationship with people, you spend time with those people. The more time you spend with people, the more opportunity there is for there to be disunity. It just happens. That same game that I was working on Thursday was really funny because these weren't two opposite teams playing each other. It was the same team playing each other. But if you had heard the things that were going back and forth across the field, there was not a lot of unity on that team yet. A lot of name calling. There was a lot of put downs. There was a lot of stuff. In fact, it got so bad that there was a team conversation at the end of the game. Say, guys, don't you understand? We're supposed to be on the same team. If we can't lift each other up, who will? If we can't figure out a way to support and encourage one another, who in the world will? See, part of our story, I agree with the video, part of our story is that we are called to be a family. That means when there is struggle, we come alongside one another and we help support each other through that struggle. It means that when there are times of celebration, we come along and we celebrate together. Next week, we're going to get the opportunity again to celebrate baptism together. Man, that's a celebration moment. That's an excitement moment. We have been through, many of us, as we have seen children born, and we celebrate new life that is coming and being a part. We have celebrated when God has brought us through difficulty and hurt and pain and brought us to the other side of that. There is this incredible moment of family when we celebrate those things. Like any family, there are just certain traditions. And when those traditions happen, it brings about that sense of familiarity and comfort and connection to a time that has gone before us. Even in the short period of time that we have known as a church, there are things that we have begun to do that feel familiar. I love it on Sunday. If you're not a part of what we do on Sundays after church, you're kind of missing out because it's so much fun. And on Sundays, after church is done, a lot of us just go out and eat. And we pick a different place every week, and somebody says, well, hey, where do you want to go? And somebody else says, well, bank account's low, so let's go to Wendy's. And the next week, well, it's not as bad, so let's go here, let's go do whatever. And it's just this connection moment. And it's not like just a little group, it's just anybody that wants to go. And last week, I couldn't go do that. I had to leave to be a part of another event that I had to go to. And it was so funny because, like, that's my tradition. That's what I do on Sundays. I worship together with the family, and then I go out and I connect and visit and all with the family. And I missed that tradition last week. I missed that sense of familiarity and connection. Part of our story is that we continue to cultivate those relationships. And the word that Paul uses here over and over and over is unity. Now, it's really important for us to understand what that word is. You understand that unity does not mean there is no conflict. Unity does not mean we all agree about everything all of the time. Unity does not mean that nobody says anything bad about one another or nobody has hurt feelings or any of those kinds. That is not what unity means. What unity means is that our common calling and purpose is greater than our individual struggles and misconceptions. It means that we believe so much in our shared purpose that we are not willing to let anything else come in the way of us accomplishing that shared goal and purpose. So when we struggle with one another, we go to one another and we work those things out because we don't want that to stand in the way of our common shared goal and purpose, which is to help people take the next step in their journey of faith. It means that if John's got an issue with me, because I was snippy to him at staff meeting that week, which only happens every week, right? Okay, it doesn't happen any more often than that. If that happens, and John's frustrated with me, and he never comes and communicates that, guess what? It's going to affect the way he leads worship. It's going to affect the way he communicates with other people. It's going to affect the way that he thinks about me and feels about me. And so if he comes and he has that conversation with me, then there's the opportunity for us as brothers in Christ to find unity. It's the opportunity for us to forgive one another and love one another and move forward in unity. Why in the world is unity so important? Why is it that Paul mentions it not only here, but over and over and over as he writes to the New Testament churches? I'll tell you why. It's because unity is the thing that is not found almost anywhere else. I'm telling you right now, at your work, most of the time you don't find unity. And it's not that you're not all working towards the same goal. It's that most of us have selfish ambitions in the midst of it. You don't want that other person that's at the same level you are to do well because you want the next promotion, not them. You want to have the good idea, not them. You want to be able to be recognized, not them. Most of the time at school, we don't find unity. Why? Well, because this person got the part, not me, or that person gets to start on the team, not me, or this person got the higher chair in band than me, or this person had this happen at the audition, not me. And all of a sudden, there is all of this opportunity for disunity, not unity. Paul says we must find unity. And at Journey Church, our unifying purpose is to help people take the next step in their journey of faith. And the great thing about that is that it applies to every single one of us here in this room. For those of us that may have had a personal relationship with Jesus for decades, who may have known him and followed him and be deeply growing in our relationship with him, guess what? There are still next steps for us to take. There are new opportunities for us to be faithful. There are new relationships for us to build and connect with for the purpose of Christ. There are constant next steps. For those of us that are here today and may have never begun a relationship with Jesus, your next step may just simply be hearing more and learning more about him, or maybe taking that step of coming to a personal relationship or following through with baptism, or taking the step of being active and serving within the local body of believers. There is always a next step for us to take. And so because of that, our unifying purpose as Journey Church in this place is that we exist not for great worship music. We exist not to have comfortable seats. We exist not just to have a safe place to come. We exist not just to have groups where we build relationships with one another. No, all of those things are a component of our unifying purpose, which is to help people take the next step in their journey of faith. So then, what does that look like in reality? As we were preparing for this part of our story, one of the things that I began doing was looking back over the last several years of the life of our church. And there are days when I look out and we're kind of packed and it's hard to find a seat when you come in the back. And there are other days when there are plenty of seats and all. And on days like that, sometimes it's easy to go, man, I wish we still had so-and-so. Man, I wish so-and-so and their family were still here. Man, I wish this person were here. I wish that person was here. Not people that left because they were upset or frustrated, but we have literally dozens of people who were an active, vibrant part of this local body of believers who no longer live here. Jobs took them other places. In fact, I want you to see visually what that looks like. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. I quickly scrolled through my Facebook friends, because that's where life begins and ends in this digital age, right? And I've got a few thousand of those friends. Can you put that map back up into that? Can you scroll forward to the end of that, Ken, and just kind of freeze it there? Represented in that list are people who were one of three things. They were regular, active attenders or members at our church. They were regular, active participants in our journey groups or regular, active participants in one of our ministry teams that have moved away because of jobs. And some of them were college students, and most of them were not. But if you look at that map, I want you to know that just a quick glance through, not catching everybody, a quick glance through, well over 75 people represented in that in 23 states that they now live, work, and worship in. See, part of our story is that. Part of our story, because it's not just my story, right? My story is a part of our story, and our story is a part of his story. And our story now says that Journey Church is helping people take the next step in their journey of faith in Alaska, in California, in Washington, in Colorado, in Florida, in Georgia. I mean, we have people all over the place that were impacted by their time here at Journey that God now has the opportunity to use to make an impact on people where he has placed them. On top of that, we have young men that are now serving in the military and are overseas. We have others that served as summer missionaries and interns that are now serving and working other places. We have people all over. And guess what? That is a part of our story. Now, if it was just about us, that couldn't be it. But because our story is a part of his story, that gets to then come full circle and be part of our story. Every week when we gather to worship, we gather not only with those who are here, but we gather knowing that those who have been with us are gathering other places now and making an impact on those communities. And we are a part of that. Because his story is so much bigger, is so much greater than our story could ever be. This is what it says just a little bit later in Ephesians chapter 4. It says he personally gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers for the training of the saints in the work of the ministry to build up the body of Christ until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of God's Son, growing into a mature man with a stature measured by Christ's fullness. I want you to know that he gave us these gifts. He gave us these opportunities not so that it could be about us, but so that it could be about others. It could be about helping others take the next step in their journey of faith. As I glanced through that list, there were people that just immediately stuck out to me, some of which many of you may never know personally. There was a young couple, Eric and Ashley Peace, who were a part of helping us begin our work here at Journey. They now serve on staff at one of the largest churches in North Carolina. She runs the entire children's ministry for one of their large satellite campuses. He helps run all of the media ministry for a campus like that. They now have multiple children that they are impacting in their home. And I look back, and their story is a part of our story, but our story is a part of their story. See people like Nate and Jill Betts, who were here leading worship for us, and Chris and Ashley Sonnenberg, who were here leading worship for us, and now are in other places in Iowa and in Southern Illinois, and we are a part of their story, and they are a part of our story. People like Kyle and Carol Ponton, their precious little boys, who are now a part of Southeast Christian Church there in Southern Indiana, just across the border from Louisville, and the work that they are doing. And yes, they were a part of our story, but we are a part of their story as they move forward in the calling that God has placed on their life. Our story is important. And so how do we move forward with unity? How do we take the gifts that God has given us and use them in a way to help people take the next step in their journey of faith? Well, I think first of all, we just have to be available. We like to joke a lot in the world of sports officiating. In fact, I got an opportunity to join a staff this week. When you get hired on to work a collegiate conference, you get hired to that staff. And it was a staff that I hadn't been hired to previously, and I thought it was way too late to be added to it and that kind of thing. I got a text saying, "Hey, are you open on such and such a date?" The answer is yes. Before I'd even looked, yes. Because I knew it was something that I'd want to do. And I got a text back, "Well, welcome to this staff." And it was this cool feeling, because here I get the opportunity to go and to do something. And then I'm talking with a friend of mine. He goes, "Yep," he said, "it's what we've always said." He said, "Availability trumps ability." So what he was telling me is, you're really not good enough for that, but because you were open, you got the job. And he's right. I'm not yet really ready for that, but yet I got the opportunity because I was open. You know what? When it comes to our spiritual journey, most of us aren't ready for the things that God has called us to do. But you know what? If we are available, if we are open, He will make us ready. He will use us in the way we need to be used to help people take the next step in their journey of faith, whether it's working with kids or tots on Sunday morning, or working with our teenagers on Sunday nights, or working within the life of our journey groups to reach out to other people, or just welcoming folks as they walk in on a Sunday morning. God has given us the ability to come back to that first video, to be a family. Being a family, finding unity does not mean we all always agree on everything. In fact, it doesn't even mean we always get along. It doesn't mean there aren't hurt feelings or struggles, but it means that our common purpose, our focus of helping people take the next step in their journey of faith, is greater than all of that stuff. It means that we are willing to deal with that stuff. We're willing to work through that stuff because of our purpose. Because He first loved us. We now serve others. God, we come to You today and we thank You for this reminder that, God, we are a family. That, God, You are the head of that family, and we are Your children. And God, sometimes, just like earthly children, God, sometimes we are disobedient. Sometimes we complain. Sometimes we drag our feet. Sometimes we bicker with each other. But God, let us be so focused on the purpose that you have called us to. God, let us be so intent on accomplishing those things that you want for us that we don't let anything stand in the way. God, you are so good. You are so gracious. God, our individual stories speak of miracles that you have worked in our lives. God, let our story as a church, just as was reflected in the map a second ago, God, remind us that you are constantly about doing things that are bigger than just us. God, let our story bring honor and glory to you, because ultimately it is your story. God, thank you. Thank you for loving us enough to send your Son for us. We pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for being here today. As you leave today, and there are just some next steps that I think just make sense for a lot of us. And maybe for some of us today, a next step is just calling somebody and say, you know what, man, I would love you to come and be a part of my journey group tonight or this week. And I'd love you to come to worship with me next week or come to third Sunday night worship. Part of helping people take the next step sometimes is just an invitation. Would you come? Would you go with me? And for some of us, it needs to be about reminding ourselves of our common purpose together. That we exist to help people take the next step. And it's my prayer that we would all take those steps this week. Have a great week. Can't wait to see you back in groups and back to worship again next week.